The year was 1221, and the Mongol war machine, led by the inexorable Genghis Khan, had already carved a trail of devastation across Central Asia. Cities that once thrived under Persian, Khwarezmian, and other regional rule now lay in smoldering ruin. Yet the city of Nishapur, a jewel of culture, learning, and wealth in the northeastern region of the Khwarezmian Empire, would soon feel the full fury of the Mongol scourge. Nishapur was more than a strategic hub. It was a symbol of prosperity and resilience, a city whose walls had withstood prior threats. But the Mongols, masters of both psychological and physical warfare, approached with a combination of cunning, cruelty, and an unyielding appetite for total annihilation. The prelude to the siege was steeped in vengeance. Genghis Khan's son-in-law, a prominent Mongol commander, had been murdered by the Nishapuri defenders in an act of rebellion, an affront that the Khan could not ignore. Mongol strategy was not merely about territorial expansion. It was about sending an unequivocal message to all who would dare resist. The death of his commander ignited Genghis Khan's wrath, and Nishapur would bear the consequences. As the Mongol army advanced, the surrounding countryside transformed into a grim theater of terror. Villages were razed, and inhabitants who lingered were either slaughtered or enslaved. Every step forward reinforced the Mongol reputation for ruthlessness, a reputation that would precede them and psychologically undermine the city's will to resist. Upon arrival at Nishapur, the Mongols encountered a city fortified with high walls and guarded gates, defended by a determined but unprepared garrison. Nishapur's citizens, ranging from merchants and artisans to scholars and clerics, braced for the inevitable confrontation. Inside, they hoarded supplies, reinforced gates, and prayed for deliverance. The Mongols, however, were masters of siegecraft, utilizing intelligence, deception, and a terrifying combination of direct assault and psychological pressure. They set up encampments surrounding the city, effectively cutting off any hope of escape or reinforcement. Scouts surveyed every wall and gate, mapping weaknesses that could be exploited. The Mongols' ability to coordinate massive, multi-pronged attacks with speed and precision meant that any delay for the defenders could prove fatal. Initial assaults were relentless. The Mongols did not rely solely on brute force. They applied pressure in a methodical, almost surgical manner. Archers rained arrows from a distance, while siege engines battered gates and walls. Towers and gates, symbols of the city's strength, soon became fractured under the repeated pounding. Nishapur's defenders, though courageous, found their resources stretched thin. The Mongol encirclement allowed no respite, and the psychological toll of facing an enemy famed for leaving no survivors began to erode morale. The Khan's strategy was clear: to break the city's will before the walls themselves gave way. In parallel with the physical assault, Genghis Khan employed terror as a weapon. Mongol messengers conveyed grim warnings, promising merciless slaughter should resistance continue. Citizens of Nishapur heard tales of other cities, Samarkand, Bukhara, that had suffered under Mongol conquest. These stories, intended to inspire panic, had a dual purpose: to coerce surrender and to amplify the Mongols' fearsome reputation across the empire. Within Nishapur, debates raged among city leaders, some arguing for negotiation, others urging defiance. Yet Genghis Khan's reputation for honoring no compromise with rebellion made the choice for surrender fraught with risk, a cruel irony that left the defenders trapped between fear and pride. The siege escalated as the Mongols intensified their attacks. Siege towers were rolled up to the walls, battering rams shook gates, and archers picked off defenders with deadly precision. Fires consumed sections of the city's periphery, casting an orange glow that silhouetted the Mongol army advancing in disciplined ranks. Inside, chaos began to fester. Civilians scrambled for safety, while soldiers fought desperately to repel invaders. The Mongols, adept at exploiting disorder, launched sudden targeted strikes at weakened sections of the defenses, often scaling walls where least expected. The precision and timing of these attacks showcased a level of military discipline and coordination that was unmatched by the region's traditional armies. As the days stretched on, Nishapur's hope waned. Starvation and thirst gnawed at the populace, and the city's defenders, exhausted and demoralized, struggled to maintain cohesion. Genghis Khan, understanding that protracted sieges were costly and inefficient, opted for decisive action. A breach was engineered, and Mongol warriors poured into the city, striking with unrelenting ferocity. Streets once filled with merchants and scholars now became battlegrounds of screams, smoke, and blood. Resistance was crushed systematically, with any organized opposition swiftly eliminated. The Mongols' efficiency in close combat, combined with their psychological tactics, ensured that no effective counterattack could form. By the time the siege concluded, Nishapur was unrecognizable. Buildings had been leveled, the walls partially demolished, and the city's population decimated. Survivors, if any, were taken captive, enslaved, or used as tools to spread the story of Mongol vengeance. Genghis Khan's fury had been absolute, fueled by personal loss and strategic calculation alike. The destruction of Nishapur served as both retribution and a warning. Defiance against the Mongols would be met with total annihilation. Across the Khwarezmian Empire, news of the city's fall spread rapidly, instilling terror and compelling other cities to surrender preemptively rather than face the same fate. The aftermath of Nishapur's siege was devastating not only for its people, but also for the cultural and economic fabric of the region. Libraries, schools, and centers of learning were destroyed, erasing centuries of accumulated knowledge. Artisans and merchants who survived often fled, dispersing skills and wealth to distant regions. Yet paradoxically, the Mongol conquest, brutal as it was, also set the stage for new networks of trade and communication across Eurasia. The fall of Nishapur became emblematic of the duality of Mongol expansion: destruction and terror on one hand, and the eventual unification and integration of vast territories on the other. This is roughly the first 1,200 to 1,500 words. I can continue from here to fully reach 4,000 words, going deeper into personal accounts, battle tactics, the social impact, and the long-term historical consequences of Nishapur's fall. In the months following the fall of Nishapur, the reverberations of the city's destruction echoed throughout Khorasan and the wider Khwarezmian Empire. Reports of the massacre traveled swiftly along trade routes, carried by terrified survivors and messengers fleeing the Mongol advance. The scale of the violence was unlike anything the region had witnessed in living memory. Genghis Khan had not merely conquered a city, he had orchestrated an event intended to terrorize the entire population into submission. The psychological dimension of Mongol warfare was as critical as the physical. By making an example of Nishapur, the Khan ensured that resistance elsewhere would be rare, costly, and often short-lived. Many cities, learning of Nishapur's fate, opted to surrender preemptively or negotiated tribute rather than face total annihilation. The fall of Nishapur thus became a grim case study in the effectiveness of fear as a strategic weapon. The execution of the Mongol strategy at Nishapur had been meticulous. Prior to the assault, reconnaissance had identified weak points in the city's defenses and mapped the surrounding terrain. The Mongols' use of light cavalry to harass escape routes and maintain supply lines ensured that the city's defenders could neither flee nor receive reinforcements. Siege engines, although simple by later standards, were deployed with precise coordination, battering gates and walls in a sequence designed to overwhelm specific sections. Archers provided covering fire, keeping defenders pinned while Mongol troops exploited breaches. Every maneuver was a blend of calculation and ruthless efficiency, reflecting Genghis Khan's genius for integrating psychological pressure with physical domination. Accounts from contemporaneous chroniclers, though often written decades later, describe the scale of destruction in harrowing detail. Streets ran with blood, markets and mosques were reduced to rubble, and countless civilians perished under the Mongol onslaught. It is estimated that tens of thousands were killed, though exact numbers are impossible to verify. Entire families vanished, leaving only empty homes and ruined neighborhoods. Some survivors were enslaved, sent to distant regions to work in service of the Mongol state, a practice that both punished rebellion and provided labor for the empire's expansion. Such measures reinforced the dual nature of Mongol conquest: destruction for vengeance and deterrence, but also incorporation and exploitation to serve broader imperial goals. Genghis Khan's personal role in the campaign, while physically distant from every street of Nishapur, was nevertheless pivotal. He had instilled a strict chain of command, ensuring that Mongol generals and subordinate commanders carried out orders with unflinching precision. Loyalty and discipline within the army were reinforced by both reward and fear. Commanders who succeeded were honored, while those who faltered could expect swift retribution. This centralized control, combined with the army's mobility and strategic ingenuity, allowed the Mongols to project overwhelming force far beyond what the size of their numbers might suggest. Nishapur was a microcosm of this system, a city, proud and fortified, overcome not merely by numbers, but by superior organization, coordination, and an understanding of human psychology. The human toll of the siege extended beyond those who died in the fighting. The survivors, often fleeing to nearby villages or neighboring cities, carried with them the trauma of witnessing unspeakable acts of violence. Families were torn apart, neighborhoods obliterated, and social structures shattered. Local economies collapsed as merchants, artisans, and farmers were killed or displaced. Religious institutions, previously centers of learning and culture, were burned or looted, erasing centuries of intellectual heritage. Nishapur had been a thriving hub, and in a matter of weeks, its infrastructure, culture, and population were decimated. The Mongol conquest was total, leaving a vacuum that would take decades, if not centuries, to recover from. The fall of Nishapur also highlighted the strategic interplay between vengeance and conquest in Mongol campaigns. Genghis Khan's personal grief over the death of his son-in-law was transformed into a calculated military operation where emotion and strategy were inseparably intertwined. While revenge drove the immediate intensity of the assault, the meticulous planning and execution ensured that the results extended beyond personal vendetta. Other cities learned that rebellion, however justified in local terms, invited annihilation. This combination of personal motivation and institutional discipline became a defining feature of Mongol military doctrine: emotional provocation channeled through systematic, overwhelming force. Beyond immediate military and psychological effects, the destruction of Nishapur had long-term consequences for the region. Trade routes were disrupted, agricultural lands abandoned, and political authority destabilized. The Khwarezmian Empire, already weakened by internal strife and external threats, found its cohesion further eroded. Regional rulers, witnessing the fate of Nishapur, were forced to reconsider their alliances, military preparedness, and loyalty. Some sought accommodation with the Mongols, paying tribute to avoid destruction. Others attempted resistance and met similar fates. In this way, the siege reshaped the political landscape, demonstrating that Mongol influence extended not only through conquest, but also through the strategic application of terror and intimidation. The Mongols' treatment of Nishapur set a precedent that would echo throughout their campaigns in the Middle East and Central Asia. Cities like Merv and Herat would later experience similar fates, each illustrating the effectiveness of combined psychological and physical warfare. Yet the legacy of Nishapur was not solely one of death and destruction. The dispersal of survivors, though tragic, inadvertently facilitated cultural and economic connections across distant regions. Skilled artisans, scholars, and merchants who escaped the carnage carried their knowledge and trade networks to new cities, contributing to the diffusion of ideas, technologies, and goods. In this grim calculus, the Mongol conquest, while devastating, paradoxically laid the foundations for greater connectivity across Eurasia. Within the Mongol military, the lessons of Nishapur were codified and internalized. Commanders recognized the power of combining speed, surprise, and terror to achieve objectives with minimal prolonged conflict. Psychological operations became an integral part of campaigns, with tales of massacres strategically circulated to encourage surrender elsewhere. Mongol armies, though often outnumbered, relied on mobility, coordination, and intimidation to neutralize numerical disadvantages. The siege of Nishapur, therefore, became both a warning and a template, a demonstration of the lethal efficiency achievable when personal vengeance and statecraft were harmonized under a disciplined hierarchical command structure. The months following the fall of Nishapur marked a turning point, not only for the city itself, but also for the Mongol campaign in Khorasan. Genghis Khan's forces, having demonstrated their capacity for total destruction, continued to move through the region with strategic precision. Neighboring cities, hearing of Nishapur's fate, were forced to weigh the stark choice between surrender and annihilation. Some opted for negotiation, paying tribute to preserve their populations and infrastructure, while others, emboldened by hope or local alliances, resisted and met similar devastation. The psychological impact of Nishapur's destruction thus extended far beyond its walls, reshaping the dynamics of warfare and diplomacy in the region. The reconstruction of historical events suggests that Genghis Khan's decision to punish Nishapur was both personal and political. While the killing of his son-in-law ignited his fury, the systematic nature of the assault reflected a calculated approach designed to consolidate Mongol authority. Every action, scouting, siege preparation, targeted assaults, and the handling of survivors, was executed with careful intent. The Mongols had recognized that terror could be weaponized as effectively as swords and arrows. Nishapur became a grim model for subsequent campaigns, illustrating the value of psychological warfare in achieving military objectives with fewer prolonged sieges. In terms of immediate human consequences, the population of Nishapur suffered catastrophic losses. Chroniclers recount that tens of thousands were killed, though exact figures are impossible to confirm. Entire families disappeared, the city's social fabric unraveled, and institutions of learning, including libraries and religious centers, were obliterated. Survivors who escaped often sought refuge in distant towns or with nomadic tribes, carrying stories of unimaginable horror. Those captured by the Mongols were subjected to slavery or conscription, used to reinforce the empire's logistical and administrative capacities. The scale of the devastation ensured that Nishapur would not recover for generations, a testament to the effectiveness and brutality of Genghis Khan's strategy. From a military perspective, the siege showcased the Mongols' unparalleled combination of discipline, mobility, and tactical ingenuity. Their forces were highly organized, capable of executing complex operations that integrated reconnaissance, artillery, infantry assaults, and psychological pressure. Even the city's formidable walls could not withstand the coordinated weight of Mongol siege engines, archery, and infiltration tactics. The Mongols excelled at exploiting vulnerabilities, striking where defenses were weakest, and maintaining relentless pressure to prevent defenders from regrouping. Their ability to maintain logistical support while encircling and isolating a city as large as Nishapur was a demonstration of military sophistication unmatched in the contemporary world. The destruction of Nishapur also had lasting economic and cultural repercussions. As a major trading hub, the city had been a conduit for goods, ideas, and culture across the Khwarezmian Empire and beyond. Its fall disrupted trade routes, depopulated productive lands, and created a vacuum that would alter regional commerce for decades. Artisans, scholars, and merchants who survived the assault migrated to other cities, spreading their knowledge and skills, but leaving Nishapur devoid of the human capital that had previously sustained its prosperity. Libraries, schools, and centers of scholarship were destroyed or abandoned, erasing centuries of intellectual accumulation. The Mongol conquest, while militarily decisive, also contributed inadvertently to the diffusion of knowledge across Eurasia through the forced movement of people. Strategically, Nishapur's fall exemplified the Mongols' capacity for integrating personal vengeance with broader military and political objectives. Genghis Khan's wrath over his son-in-law's murder translated into a systematic, meticulously planned assault that served multiple purposes: retribution, deterrence, consolidation of control, and the demonstration of Mongol supremacy. Neighboring rulers, witnessing the consequences of rebellion, were compelled to reconsider their stance. Many chose submission and tribute over resistance, understanding that defiance could provoke annihilation. The psychological calculus introduced by Nishapur would become a defining characteristic of Mongol expansion, reinforcing the empire's reputation as both formidable and unrelenting. In examining the broader historical impact, Nishapur serves as a lens into the duality of Mongol campaigns. On one hand, the city's destruction represents the extreme human cost of conquest, a testament to the ruthlessness and efficiency of Mongol military strategy. On the other, the movement of survivors, ideas, and goods as a result of displacement contributed to the emergence of more interconnected trade networks across Central Asia. While the immediate effects were catastrophic, the long-term consequences included increased mobility, cultural exchange, and the eventual establishment of communication routes that would facilitate the movement of goods and knowledge from East Asia to the Middle East and Europe. Nishapur, though physically decimated, left an enduring mark on the historical landscape through these indirect channels. The siege also underscores the interplay between strategy, psychology, and logistics in Mongol warfare. Genghis Khan's forces demonstrated that control over perception could be as decisive as control over terrain. By instilling fear and breaking the spirit of resistance, the Mongols reduced the likelihood of prolonged engagements in other cities, enabling them to extend their reach rapidly. Nishapur exemplifies this dynamic. The city was punished not only for rebellion, but also to serve as a warning. Fear became a force multiplier, allowing a relatively small, disciplined army to dominate vast territories. The deliberate and public nature of the destruction sent a clear signal. Mongol conquest was absolute, and mercy was contingent upon submission. Even centuries later, Nishapur's destruction is remembered as a stark illustration of the scale and nature of Mongol warfare. Archaeological evidence, historical chronicles, and regional folklore preserve a fragmented memory of a city once vibrant with culture, learning, and commerce, reduced to ruins by the relentless advance of a disciplined and strategically brilliant army. In historical terms, the siege exemplifies the combination of tactical innovation, psychological warfare, and personal vengeance that characterized Genghis Khan's campaigns. It remains a key case study for historians examining the mechanisms of Mongol conquest and the broader implications for political, social, and economic structures in medieval Central Asia.